Matthew chapter 9. It's page 790 in your Pew Bible, which is in front of you if you're using that. A couple weeks ago, Jackie was doing a geography lesson with Carson, and the question was, name any place in the world you'd want to go. And the point was that they would then find out if it was north, south, east, or west of where we live. So Jackie asked, and she's thinking Carson's going to say Disney World. She's hoping for a country. And his answer was Legoland, which is a place, not exactly what she was looking for. And so she kind of started to push a little bit more, asking for this. And he said, well, I really just want to go to all these different countries and tell people about Jesus. So, good answer, right? Like, Christian parents, that's what we want to hear. We want to hear that he wants to tell people about Jesus. So she starts to push a little bit more and say, okay, well, what country do you want to go to tell people about Jesus? Legoland. So, people in Legoland need Jesus just as much as they do in China. And so our son will be sent out as a missionary to the people of Legoland. But here's the thing, the reason I say that is because even at 7 years old, kids can grasp the concept that people need to hear about Jesus. Right? He understands this, he gets this. You don't have to be in church long, you don't have to read the Bible for long to find out that God has a heart for the nations, that his plan is to save the nations. But somewhere along the line, and I'm guessing many of us actually said that at one point, like we want to go tell people in other countries about Jesus, whether it was the excitement of missions work when we'd heard stories in our churches, whether it was reading about the Apostle Paul and all the work that he did in the New Testament, whatever it might be, we probably said something similar if we grew up in the church. But somewhere along the lines, something happens. We begin to see that passion for sharing the gospel, for going to the nations, start to diminish more and more over the years. And it usually happens because we start to find out that when we tell people about Jesus, they aren't always as happy to hear about it as we are to tell them. And then there's pushback. There might be outright rejection or name-calling or persecution. And we start to find out this is actually difficult. And many times, it actually comes as a surprise to us. It comes as a surprise that why aren't people as excited about this as I am? And then you hear stories about missionaries where they work for years and years and years and see very little fruit from their work. And you start to say, maybe this is a little bit more difficult than I originally thought. And so we start to convince ourselves that ministry to the nations, whether that's here or abroad, is really for those elite Christians, the super Christians, the Apostle Paul-like Christians. And we forget that God's plan is for all of us to be involved in this work to the nations. And so if you see in your notes this morning, we're looking at the Messiah and the nations. So what does the Messiah, Jesus Christ, expect of us in regards to the work for the nations? And I think it's really hard for many of us, if you haven't lived overseas for any period of time, to really kind of start to grasp, because we see things on the news, but it's really hard to grasp what actually it's like to live in some other areas in this world. And so I just got a few stories that I want to just put out there to let us to start to get in this understanding of the nations and God's heart for the nations. So the first one is, imagine moving your family from home to home, village to avoid violence that is so prevalent in your country. And finally, you move one location, and the last straw is your son is outside playing and a bomb goes off near him, 8 years old, and rips apart his abdomen. Gets taken to a hospital where they can't do anything for him. And so they have to send him across the border to another country where they can treat him. You don't have a car, so you and the rest of your kids walk across the border to get to this other country, to get to the hospital where your son is. Unable to speak that language, unable to really understand what's happening with your son, and then finally saying, okay, son's out of the hospital, I'm moving to a different place. You flee, you run, you go somewhere else to get away from this violence. Again, to a country you do not know, to a language you do not know, finding out that your son's school will be an hour away from where you are. Secondly, imagine being 13 years old, tearing up your feet from the terrain where you live and having kids make fun of you every day at school because you don't have shoes. And then having your parents every day when you say, can I get shoes, say, when we have enough money. And your mom, who believes in the God of the Bible, prays and fasts, and you just get angrier and angrier because God is not answering her prayers. Or imagine losing a high-paying job. You're a recent college grad, you get a great job, you lose that job, you're in your mid-20s, you start to look for some international opportunities. You find one in the United States, you pay thousands of dollars to recruiters, you land in the States, and instead of being taken to your job, you're forced into a life of prostitution. no family, no friends, no one to call, with no way of escape. I say the word imagine, but I don't even think we can even begin to understand what it means to live in some of these situations. I know I don't. So I'm not up here as someone who can say I do. I'm trying to understand what this is like. So we hear stories like this. And then we were in Isaiah 61 when we started off this series, Isaiah 61, 1 through 4, and we looked at the fact that Jesus in Luke 4 reads the scroll, and his hometown is in Nazareth, and he says, "This is me. I'm the long-awaited Messiah. This is who this passage is talking about, and this is me." And what are some of the things he says? We're not going to read the whole passage again, but here's some of the things that Jesus is taking on himself as the Messiah. He says he will proclaim the good news of the kingdom, bind up the brokenhearted, set the captives free, release them from darkness, comfort the mourning, and provide for the grieving. In week 1, we looked at something really important, and that is that Jesus has a holistic ministry. A holistic ministry. He is concerned about people created in the image of God in all of our life, not just spiritually. He's engaged in us knowing that it has the known needs and the unknown needs Jesus is going after when he is here. Now, we're in Matthew 9, but Matthew 9 falls within a very interesting part of Matthew in the fact that it's between the Sermon on the Mount and kind of this next big missions sermon that Jesus gives. And so we're going to kind of look in chapter 8, in chapter 10 a little bit, and kind of find out what again does Jesus expect of us as he sends us out to the nations. And so here's what we're going to see, and you see it in your notes, that the Messiah, he enters in, he cares for others, and he calls for more workers. And that's what we're going to see this morning. So just a few preliminary comments before we get started. We're talking about the nations. This is a large group of people. 7.7 billion people in the world. And conservative estimates are that 4.5 billion of those don't know Jesus. Okay? 1/3 of the world claims to be Christian by name at least. So 4.5 billion don't know Jesus, don't claim to be Christians. And that's including people who live here in the U.S. and those who live abroad. And so this morning we're talking about refugees and immigrants, oppressed people groups, third world countries, the unreached, those who don't have access to the gospel with the unreached. Right? There's no churches. There aren't a big group of people, mission presence there. And there are many people in that situation. So we're talking about a very large group of people. So I'm not going to be able to really pinpoint any particular group. We're looking at this again as God's heart for the nations, looking past ourselves to those around the world. And secondly, even last night, I was hearing in the news all this stuff with politics and all this kind of stuff involving the nations, and I was like, don't get in that mode, don't think that way, because I can't go down that route the day before you preach. Bad idea. So what we're talking about this morning is we're saying, what does the Bible say about people? So what does the Bible say about people, and how do Christians respond and react to people? People created in the image of God. Doesn't matter what the laws in our country or laws in other countries say about them. We're talking about people who are created in God's image, people that God sent his son to die for. All right, so that's what the mindset that I want us to be in this morning. All that other stuff will come at a different time, but for now, we need to focus on them as people, again, who Jesus gave his life for. So let's first look at the fact that Jesus enters in. So look at verse 35. Matthew 9:35. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. So what we have here in this first verse is really a summary of everything Jesus has been doing in chapters 8 and 9, and also looking forward to what he's going to say and do in chapter 10. Okay, so this is kind of that summary passage. So the summary is that Jesus has been traveling around in this region. There's about 200 different villages in this region. There's a few million people in this region, including Capernaum and Nazareth, towns we've heard of. Nazareth being the hometown of Jesus, where he actually reads that scroll from Isaiah 61 and takes again and says, I am the Messiah. And what we see here is like, this is a huge ministry effort. He makes it a priority to enter into these places, to go to these people. He had a purpose, and it was a holistic purpose. So he taught and proclaimed the good news, of course, but again, we're looking past the spiritual. He also cared about them physically. So in Matthew 8 and 9, Jesus heals 12 different people, kind of in rapid succession if you're reading through those chapters. That includes healing from disease, demonic oppression, and raising people from the dead. Okay? 12 different times before we get to this passage, he's doing this in these villages. Probably more. This is what we have recorded. And when you think about this, this is just what we just celebrated at Advent. Christ coming into the world. This isn't new. Jesus comes, he enters in. The Father sends the Son. And what I think is interesting about the Christmas story, the shepherds come to Jesus as a baby. The wise men will eventually come to Jesus. We read a lot of times about people flocking to Jesus when they find out where he is. But I think we can often think that that's all. Jesus just had this massive following, and we forget about the many times that Jesus entered in to situations. Jesus entered into many different situations. He initiated. He enters into the mess. He enters into a conversation. He enters into people's lives. So here's some things about Jesus. He would go to places where other people wouldn't go. He would touch people that other people wouldn't touch or really go near. He would have conversations with people that others, including the religious leaders, would avoid. Jesus entered in. That is his ministry. He is going to people. And what I think is interesting, in Matthew 8, Jesus also calls his disciple Matthew, the tax collector. Then he goes to his house, and the Pharisees see Jesus eating with, it says, tax collectors and sinners. And so, of course, they ask the natural question, why is Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners? And what does Jesus say? Matthew 8, 12 to 13, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. See, Jesus is concerned about people. He sits down. Tell me your story. I want to know about you. He enters into their lives. He was more concerned with them, getting to know them. He valued them. And then he knew when he values them, when he shows that, when he cares about the whole person, that then their hearts are softened to hear the good news of who he is and what he's come to do. And the religious leaders think they have it all figured out, and their hearts are hardened. But Jesus enters in and goes after the heart of each person. And so you start to think, well, that was Jesus, okay? That's Jesus. Okay, extend it one more time. The disciples now. In chapter 10, 1 through 8, Jesus sends the disciples. He's telling them, I'm sending you out. Okay? And then, again, you're going to say, like, well, that's the disciples. That's the 12. He says in 7 and 8, you're going to proclaim the kingdom of heaven. You're going to heal the sick. You're going to raise the dead. You're going to heal those with leprosy and drive out demons, because he gives them the authority to do this. I've done one of those things. I try and proclaim the gospel. The other things I haven't done. So you're like, well, those are the 12. And it's like, well, wait, just one second. Go back to Isaiah 61. Jesus' whole ministry is about being a holistic ministry, looking after the whole person. And then the disciples go and do the same thing. And then where do we go? We've been talking about this the whole series. We do the same exact thing. We offer spiritual, emotional, intellectual, relational, financial help as a church, as a body, doing this together, looking after the whole person. And that is our ministry. We continue that ministry, maybe in a different way, but we continue that ministry, looking after the whole person, because we know that if we do that, they're more likely to listen to our message. Okay? When we do that, they're more likely to listen to our message. Now, entering in is difficult. We're going to come back to some specific ways that we can do that personally and as a church, but entering into people's lives is difficult, especially when they're different, when they look different, when they sound different, when we don't understand how to respond or react to their life or their situation. And so it's oftentimes a very uncomfortable step. But we have Jesus, not only as our example, but as our Savior. So look at verse 36, because verse 36 will give us the key to how we can enter into people's lives. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus cares for others. Over the months of ministry, ministering to tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, when he looks at the crowds and he saw them, he sees burdensome people, distractions to the real ministry, people not worth his time and effort. Is that what it says? No. What does it say? He had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Here we get to see Jesus' heart for people, his compassion. And his compassion is why he enters in. His compassion is why he's able to enter in. And this compassion talks, it's moving to pity. It's not this, oh, bless their hearts kind of, compassion. Like we feel something for them. It is to the very core of who he is. It moves him in the deepest part of who he is. He has this compassion for these people. It's this gut-wrenching agony as he looks out over these 200 villages, over these millions of people. And some of you have experienced this feeling maybe. I don't know if everybody has, but some of you have. It's that compassion that you have for a person that you see in your life that you care about who's destroying their life with the choices they're making. It's that kind of gut-wrenching, affects everything about your life. Or maybe it's seeing somebody that you love reject Christ, walk away from Jesus and the faith. And then I think we can maybe put into we can maybe kind of experience a little bit of what this feels like. And then the question that I have for us is, have you ever looked out at someone and had this feeling that without me, they would have no hope? Without me, they would have no hope. The closest I can think of is with young kids. When you bring a baby home and you look at them, they have no hope for a future unless you do your job, unless you take care of them. They're completely dependent on you. Okay, they're completely dependent. Now multiply that out to something that we cannot even comprehend, and that's what Jesus felt when he saw the crowds. Is he looks at them, he says, I'm the only one that can do something for them. Ultimately. All these people. And they're running around, shepherdless sheep, trying to find these things in all these different places, all these different areas. And he has compassion because he knows I'm the only one that can bring true, real, abundant life to these people. And yet, Jesus came as a baby. He came as a man. And so he was limited in that time when he was here for one place, one time. And so what does he do? Shepherdless sheep. I'm going to send my disciples. I'm going to train them up to go and tell those people about me. And those disciples did it, and we're here today, and we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to look out and see and have compassion and see people as sheep without a shepherd and point them to the good shepherd. I don't know much about sheep shepherding, right? I don't experience this, but I know shepherdless sheep won't survive very long. They won't survive very long. Wandering sheep don't last very long. It just doesn't happen. So how does this help us care for people? We have to understand that we were those wandering sheep. That's us. That's who Jesus saw when he was looking out. Apart from Jesus, we are shepherdless sheep wandering around without hope. When we realize this and see the heart of God, and through his grace and his mercy, sending Jesus to be that good shepherd for us, to take that punishment on himself, we can say amen with the Apostle Paul when he then goes to others, and we go to the nations saying, Christ's love compels us because we've experienced Christ's love, and that is now our driving motivation. He looks out and he sees he has compassion, and we can start to have that compassion in us as well. And what does the Apostle Paul say in 2 Corinthians 5 then? He goes on and he says, we implore you, be reconciled to God. Why? Because he experienced that himself and he knows how good that is. And so that is our motivation, to have compassion. Only those who have been changed by the gospel will be willing to go to the nations. Changed by the gospel, going to the nations. We need to be moved to the very core of our being, which means we need to be praying that the things that break God's heart would break ours as well. That when we see people, we see them as he does, as sheep without a shepherd, and say, I know that shepherd. Let me tell you who he is. And that compassion drives us. God has had a heart for the nations from the very beginning. And if we're followers of Jesus, we will see our hearts change towards the nations. We will seek to find ways to enter in. We will seek ways to enter in. Before we do, though, we need to keep going in verse 37 and 38 and see what kinds of workers does God call. Look at 37. Then he said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. I'm sure many of you have seen this verse plastered across churches, missionary letters. I mean, these verses have probably spurred a lot of people on to missions work, right? We say these verses, we see that the harvest is plentiful, that there needs to be more workers for the harvest field. And yet we need to ask, what is actually expected of these workers? Because I think for many of us, we say, okay, I understand Jesus died for me, he saved me, I love him and I love other people, and I'm going to try and enter into their lives and take the gospel with me. And that's fine. We say, okay, sign me up for that. And then we look at chapter 10, okay? Because chapter 10 comes next. Like he's preparing the disciples for this. And then we get chapter 10. And this is where we start to see what kind of workers Jesus is calling. So on your notes, you see these kind of three things that we're going to talk about just briefly here. The one is that he calls workers who are ordinary. Okay, he calls workers who are ordinary. And so that means all of us. We all qualify for this first one. Okay? We all qualify for this first one. I'm okay saying that because when I look at the 12 disciples, we think of the 12 disciples now as very special people. Like things are named after them. We talk about them a lot. But we need to remember when Jesus called them, they were ordinary people. Nothing spectacular that would draw you to them. Nothing noteworthy about them except for the fact that Jesus called them. And so he calls ordinary men to do this work. And then he says, basically, we're going to have a prayer time here and ask the Lord to send more workers into the field. And what I love about this is you have God saying, let's pray, and then he starts answering that prayer request right away. All right, he says, let's pray that God sends more workers into the field, and by the way, you guys are those workers. Keep praying, but go work. And keep praying and go work. And it's the same for us. Pray for more workers, but be willing to be that worker. Right? And it's just this constant, we're praying, we're praying over and over again. That is what our lives should be about, going on mission for Jesus. And so we can check this first box because, again, we all qualified for this one as long as we believe in Jesus and follow him and say, yes, I'm in for this mission. So what's next? Workers who are ready to suffer. Now we get more real, okay? Workers who are ready to suffer. Look at verse 16 of chapter 10. I'm going to read up through verse 25. It says, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard. You will be handed over to local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time you will be given what to say. For it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for students to be like their teachers and servants like their masters. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household? And we're going to stop there. These verses, what Jesus is doing here, he's giving the model of what mission looks like for all of us. Because it's going to start in Israel and it's going to expand to the nations. Matthew 28, Acts 1, we know that this is happening. It's going to the ends of the earth, which means we are a part of this. And so he is setting this model. This is what this is going to look like. This is the mission, okay? This is what you can expect. And we know that because the disciples, this kind of the first time that Jesus sends them out, they didn't experience some of these things that are talked about in here. He's really saying this is what's going to happen because they're not going to the Gentiles yet. And yet we have the Gentiles in chapter 10. Why? Because this is a model for what is going to be their whole life. It's not just a mission trip, okay? It's a life of mission. And be ready because these things are going to happen. And we know that in the book of Acts that these things do happen to the apostles, are happening now to our brothers and sisters around the world. And who knows if they will happen to us. We don't know. The key verses here are 24 and 25. Jesus says, if the master Jesus is persecuted and called the prince of demons, that's what that means. He's called Satan. We should expect to be called the same. We should expect to have that same persecution, that same attitude towards us. So the mission is filled with potential suffering, including arrest, trials, hate, persecution, and so on. But for many of us, this isn't our experience of the Christian life. For many of us. We don't really truly understand what some of this persecution looks like. But what we find in 2 Timothy 3:12, the Apostle Paul says this, In fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. So in America, we don't go looking for persecution to fulfill this verse, okay? That's not what we do. We don't go to say things just so we are persecuted. And persecution is going to look different for each one of us. All right? All I know in this country and the freedoms that we have, we don't experience this type of persecution like people around the world are experiencing right now. Okay? And that's not just Christians. That's people of other faiths too. It's happening all around the world and the way that people are treated because of that. So we need to remember that suffering is really for us the first thing that leads us to Jesus. Right? What is that suffering? That suffering is understanding I'm the shepherdless sheep wandering around. I'm suffering because nothing I'm doing is actually fulfilling anything in my life. It's not satisfying. So suffering actually leads us to Christ in the first place. And then I think for many of us, we're like, okay, I'm in, and yet suffering is still part of our life. It's still going to continue because we are then to take this message to others, and that will lead to persecution. And so it is a hard thing. Michael O., who is a missionary in Japan, says that suffering is designed for Christians. Very interesting statement. And he goes on to say this. He says, we miss the whole meaning of the Christian faith when we live our lives seeking to avoid suffering and difficulty, trying to be comfortable physically, financially, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. If this had been Jesus' goal, he would have stayed in heaven. So many Christians seek to live the pain-free Christian life. Such a life has no impact. Discomfort and suffering are tools of God's discipleship in our lives, and thus part of the very good plan of God. And I love that statement. Such a life has no impact. No impact. When we are willing to suffer, when we are willing to disadvantage ourselves for the sake of others, it opens doors of hearts to receive the good news that we proclaim. If we aren't willing to suffer, we will never go to the nations, because going to the nations is difficult work. And so if we're not willing to suffer, we will not go. And I've heard comments, for years, since I was a kid at missions conferences and reading and all that, I've heard tons of comments from converts all around the world who say something like this, and the reason they were converted: anything worth suffering like that for is worth listening to. I can't even name a person I heard that from. I've heard it so many times. Something along those lines, like, this person was willing to suffer so much to tell me about this news, I should listen. That's what opens hearts to the gospel. To say this isn't pain-free. This is difficult. So ultimately, we're not just willing to suffer. Go on to the next one. We are workers who are willing to die. Look at verse 37 of chapter 10 through 39. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Jesus takes it up a notch here to make it clear that the only way that we will suffer is if we are first, again, willing to die. Die to ourselves. Again, I love my family, but if I love them more than Jesus' call on my life, I will not go to the nations. I will not disadvantage myself for the sake of others. I mean, how many missionaries over the years have heard, why would you take your family there? Right? Like, you're going to put your family in harm's way. And I think, yes, Jesus says that will happen. This will be part of our lives. Jim Elliot, who many of you know, is the famous missionary who, along with 4 other men, were killed by the Huaorani people in Ecuador back in 1956. And he is famous for summarizing this passage and saying, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose." And he's summarizing this passage. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. And so we have to believe that. Do we believe that? Do we believe that? Now, what I think is interesting here is, when is Jesus saying all this to the disciples? Before the cross ever even happens. Jesus has not gone to the cross yet, right? So he's saying you need to die to yourselves. We need to take up our cross and follow Jesus. But he's saying that to them. He hasn't even predicted his death yet. He'll do that 3 times in the book of Matthew. He hasn't even gotten to that point yet in here. So for them, they kind of know a little bit about what he's saying. Like, we know what crucifixion is. We know you have to carry your cross. And so they kind of understand this a little bit, but they're missing a huge part of this. I mean, they're probably thinking, hey, Jesus teaching a hyperbole again, until they actually see Jesus do this himself and take up his cross, which is really our cross, and he walks and takes it to his place of crucifixion, where he will actually lay down his life for the sheep, giving up his life for us for the sake of the Father's will. So what did Jesus do? He disadvantaged himself to the point of death, even death on a cross, for you, for me, for the church, for the nations. So what we see here in these last few verses is that Jesus is to be the number one priority. He should be everything in our lives, all about him. When that is true, we are willing to die. A singular purpose, a singular focus radically changes our perspective on going to the nations. And so when I was in high school, right before I graduated, I got a graduation gift, and it was the book Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper. Still one of the most transformational books I've ever read outside of Scripture. And in that, he has this story to kind of illustrate this point. And so I just want to read this short paragraph. He says, in April 2000, Ruby Eliason and Laura Edwards were killed in Cameroon, West Africa. Ruby was over 80. Single all her life, she poured it out for one great thing: to make Jesus Christ known among the unreached, the poor, and the sick. Laura was a widow, a medical doctor pushing 80 years old and serving at Ruby's side in Cameroon. The brakes failed, the car went over a cliff, and they were both killed instantly. I asked my congregation, was that a tragedy? 2 lives driven by one great passion, namely to be spent in unheralded service to the perishing poor for the glory of Jesus Christ, even 2 decades after most of the American counterparts had retired to throw away their lives on trifles. No, that is not a tragedy. That is a glory. These lives were not wasted, and these lives were not lost. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. In the end, that's the answer to the question that I started off with this morning. What does the Messiah expect of us? To love him supremely, which will lead us to enter into the lives of those who we don't know, we might be uncomfortable around, but we enter in. Why? Because we care for them. We have a deep compassion because we've been changed by the gospel. We want to see them changed as well. And then we become those workers that are sent out to the harvest. So the question is, there's a lot of people in the world. What do we do now? What do we do now personally and as a church? So quickly, just a few things we can do personally. One, we need to be praying for unreached people groups. We need to be praying for unreached people groups, again, personally, as a family, as a church. We need to be looking for those unreached peoples around the world that don't have access to the gospel like we do, anywhere close to the access to the gospel that we do. Operation World, if you're familiar with that, is a great place to start. Look that up. They will send you information each and every day, actually, on different groups that you can be praying for and the work that they're trying to do there to get missionaries there. We need to be looking for international opportunities in our backyard. Okay, there are many ministries in this area, in the Chicagoland area, that reach out to refugees or international students. And so we need to be a part of this work. And we just need to look for it. I think that's the thing. It's like, it's there. We just need to look for it. So World Relief is one that maybe some of you are familiar with. There are things that you can do as a family, like making care packages that people that arrive in the States. There are international ministries that you can look for international students, many who don't know the Lord, maybe have never heard him and come to the States and hear about him for the very first time. We also need to support international families in ways that maybe are unique and that we've never had to support somebody in that way before. There are opportunities, we just need to look for them. Community groups talk about this stuff and try and figure out how can you serve. At City View, a few different things that we're going to be doing. One is we are constantly looking at our missions here, and one of the things that we're going to do is we are having a family mission trip, partnering with the Cervantes in Tijuana, Mexico. So we're having kids and parents. We're having a meeting in January to start talking about going there and serving with them, missionary partners that we have that have been sent out from this church to say, hey, we want to be partners with you, and we want to be able to consistently send people, not just money and prayer, which is needed, and by them, and it's needed by the people that they're working with, but are we sending people And we want to be able to partner with people and say that we are sending trips multiple times a year. The other thing is our Gaius team. The Gaius team is meant to be really a care and compassion for missionaries who are on the front lines, people that need our encouragement, need our prayer. They have been willing to go. All right, and not everybody is called to go in the way that they do, okay? I hope you don't hear that this morning. We're not all going to leave tomorrow and go overseas. There are opportunities here, and one of those opportunities is to support the missionaries who are on the front lines, and some of us can do that in some unique ways. If you have questions about the Gaius team, talk to Brandon, but we want to encourage and support our missionaries. And then there's one more ministry, which I'm going to come back to in a few minutes. But I want to close with this. What happens when workers go out? When God has workers who go out, what can God do? What does he do? Because the world was turned upside down by those first Christians. So what can he do? Well, I didn't finish the stories that we started at the beginning, so let me finish those as we close. That refugee family that had to move had their life changed when a missionary was able to connect them to a compassionate doctor who had their son, or her son, moved from a school from an hour away to a school that was 5 minutes away. And then those missionaries were able to get an apartment for them and furnish that apartment for them, helping them to learn the language and pointing that family to Jesus every single day so that their mom can now say, I feel safe, fear is gone. Or the 13-year-old boy without shoes. One Sunday morning, there was a celebration service at his church. His mom dragged him to church. He's angry, he's mad at God, and what happens? Well, it's Operation Christmas Child Shoebox Sunday. And what do you think he gets in his box? Socks and shoes. Angry at God. He says, this was the first time I knew that God had answered a prayer of mine. We've been a part of that work here. Get little things that we can do, right? How much did we sacrifice for that? Probably not a whole lot. But what God can do when people think about someone else for a little bit, send it to another place where they will think about people and send people into hard places to deliver those boxes, and then people to stay. And like this young boy did, went through a 12-lesson discipleship journey with the people there. And like 6.9 million other boys and girls, he made a decision for Christ. And finally, the trafficked 20-something-year-old woman who was saved through a ministry that enters into brothels in order to tell people there is help and there is hope. There is help to leave this life, to get out of here, and for escape, and hope because there's a Savior who loves them, who died for them. Why? Because people are willing to go into very hard places, not because they have to, but because they want to, because they've been changed by the gospel, and they know others need to hear about the gospel as well, the forgiveness and the love that is offered through Jesus Christ. A ministry that we partner with, and we'd like to partner with more and want you guys to hear a little bit more about, is a ministry called New Name that looks specifically at this issue of sexual exploitation. So I'm going to ask Margaret if she would come up. Many of you know we've been looking at some of our partner ministries and had a chance to ask them some questions. So I'm going to ask Margaret a few questions this morning so she can explain a little bit more about New Name. So first, good morning. Good morning. Thank you for being here. So one of the things in light of talking about the nations, what are some reasons or ways that immigrants are particularly vulnerable to exploitation?
Good morning, everyone. So the one thing, whether immigrant or not, that we know about individuals, especially in the Chicagoland area, when they're exploited or trafficked, is that they're vulnerable. And people who exploit others know how to look for vulnerabilities. They're often trained. They know what to look for. And when you're talking about an immigrant who's somebody who's coming from another country into our country, they're a vulnerable people group. They often have a vulnerable legal status, especially in today's climate. We actually have a woman we've been working with for 4 years who's facing deportation now back to China. And she's pregnant and married. She's married to an American man and is facing deportation. So she's living every day in fear of what life is going to be like for herself and her unborn child. Women and children are vulnerable. Majority of individuals in the United States who are trafficked or exploited are women and children. That's not to say that men are not vulnerable either, because they are, especially young boys. But the majority of those trafficked and exploited in the United States are women and children, and that makes them vulnerable. Language barriers, which I think you covered a little bit in the sermon, whether they don't speak the language and so they're tricked into situations, or they become trusting of someone who does speak their home language, and they can use that as a way to build trust and coerce someone into a situation. Lack of resources is probably one of the biggest. Often people that are coming into our country, they don't have jobs yet, they don't have steady housing, they don't have the everyday resources to meet their needs, especially for women and children. And so those who are looking to exploit someone can promise those things to people, and they build a relationship with them, and then in the end they don't come through on their promise. Coming from trauma and war is a really big one. The majority of the women that we've worked with in our ministry have all been abused as children. So we know that there's trauma behind what's happening to them. And so when you have individuals coming from other countries who are coming from war and trauma and the loss of their family members, that makes them vulnerable to individuals looking to coerce people here in the United States. Family separation, so when we're separating husbands from wives and parents from children, that makes the children vulnerable to child sexual exploitation, and it makes the adults vulnerable to labor trafficking and sex trafficking as well. And then the removal of legal documents. So, and that plays into that original one of vulnerable legal status. Oftentimes exploiters will make fake documents, so then once they're here in the United States, their documents are no longer legal, which makes them vulnerable for deportation, or they hold their documents in order to keep them doing what they want them to be doing.
So we've obviously partnered with New Name in a little bit, but can you tell the church a little bit more about how you're addressing this issue now?
So our organization is we work primarily with adult women in the adult industry. So it's women who are being sexually exploited, sexually trafficked, or even if they're choosing to be in the adult industry, are facing lack of resources, lack of education, job resources, financial resources, or food. And so one of the big ways that we really partner with them is we have teams across churches all across Chicagoland who reach out to women who are actually advertised online. And we know that about 70% of the women that we're talking to on a monthly basis are exploited or trafficked. So the majority are not there of their own choosing or volition. And so we partner with them. We just let them know that there's a group of people out there that loves them, that Jesus loves them. If they'll let us pray with them, we will. And we let them know what resources are available to them. We have a safe house that is available to them for short-term housing if needed. If they need to get out of an emergency situation, we'll go and get them from wherever they're at. The other big way that we reach women is the Asian foot massage parlors or Asian spas. You probably see them, just driving around. Many of the women who are employed at those places are facing labor exploitation, sex exploitation, and sex trafficking. And many of them are immigrants or women who have been trafficked from out of the country into the United States. So we go in there, we have teams that go in there monthly with gift bags. We get Bibles on MP3 in their language because a lot of them don't speak any English, so a little bit of a language barrier for us. We have it in Mandarin, Cantonese, and Korean. And we just go in there, we just let them know that somebody's there. And the woman that I was talking about earlier that's facing deportation, she's actually one of the women that has come out of our spas and was going to school and doing really well. So we're just praying that she can stay here in the United States and stay safe. Because if she goes back to China, unfortunately, she faces being exploited again.
And then, so how can we as a church come alongside, partner with New Name in maybe a different way than we already have?
Number one is prayer. We know that we can't do anything beside what God has for us. And we know that prayer is our foundation. We are volunteers. We have over 100 volunteers total at New Name. Our volunteers face darkness. They go into dark places. They are constantly dealing with individuals who are experiencing deep trauma, some who have known the Lord and some who haven't. So just praying for the volunteers, praying for the women that we serve, holding awareness events like this, if you have community groups or book clubs or any sort of group, we can always come and do a training, because awareness is the key. If people in the community don't know what to look for, don't understand what's going on, and don't realize it's going out there, because it's probably the number one question I get in this area: is it really happening here? And I can wholeheartedly say 100% yes. It's happening here. It's happening in Naperville, Glen Ellen, Wheaton. We see it from all over the place here in the suburbs. So just awareness and knowing what to look for. And then volunteering. We have many different volunteer opportunities. Even for men, one of our newest and most exciting things is we have a John helpline. So we actually we're looking for male Christian volunteers who are willing to work with men who are struggling with sex and porn addiction. And so this is a hotline that men can call in and actually ask for help, get prayer. So men and women can really be part of this fight.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to pray for New Name. If you have more questions, Margaret will be out in the lobby after. I would encourage you to please stop by, grab some information from her, talk to her, ask her some questions. But we appreciate you being here. Again, we are trying to just let you know about these opportunities that are there through these different ministries. And so I'm going to pray for our service. Worship team's going to come up and close us with some songs, and I'm going to pray for New Name as well. Let's pray. Lord, we know that it is difficult for us to fathom what you did on the cross, giving your life for us, and knowing, Lord, that is, when we somewhat grasp that drives us to see others as those shepherdless sheep who need to hear about you, to know you, but we also need to come alongside and offer physical, tangible help to them. I thank you for New Name and all the work that they have been doing, the work they will continue to do. I pray that many in our church can maybe get involved on a personal level, and as a church we can be more engaged with this ministry going forward. Lord, I pray for the volunteers. I pray for the women that they reach out to, for the men that they reach out to. Lord, that you would continue to bring light into very dark places. Light into hearts that, again, let them know that there is help and there is hope in the gospel. And so, Lord, I thank you for their ministry and ask you would bless them in 2019. Lord, as we continue our time of worship and singing, I just pray that this is a response to all that you've been teaching us already. Lord, we do thank you for all that you have done for us and the mission we get to live out now. We love you and we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.